Okay, looks like we're live on MythVision podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been breaking news across the world. Iranian schoolgirls have been poisoned, most likely by some radical religious group that doesn't want women to go to school. However, if that were the case, I suspect that not only I, but our guest would be jumping on board with this. I have not investigated the details, but I'm here to listen to a scholar who actually is looking at this completely different. So if it was radical religious people not wanting females to go to school because of whatever religious extremism that they practice, I think we would jump on that bandwagon. However, it seems that the evidence might be pointing to something else. So stay tuned, and you're going to find out what our guest has to say on this topic. Be sure to hit the like button, share this out with somebody, and let's get the party started.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth. Nothing more.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I have a special guest, Dr. Robert Bartholomew. How are you, my friend?
Good, although, I've been getting some death threats these days since I came out with the potential explanation that mass psychogenic illness is most likely behind what's been going on in Iran. And I'm pretty confident about that. I was right on Havana syndrome. The 5 intelligence agencies have now come out and converged that it was an array of health complaints and mass psychogenic illness as well. And I was saying that in 2017 when that first happened. And they
and what is just for people
40 million on that.
So many people don't know the backdrop here. So what is going on in 2017 that you were calling it mass hysteria? Can you tell us just a little bit of that as we lead into what we're discussing today?
Yeah, in a nutshell, a bunch of U.S. diplomats in Cuba started feeling unwell after hearing a strange sound. And the theory emerged that they were being targeted by this new secret weapon by the Cubans, developed in coordination with the Russians or the Chinese. And so this went on for several years. But what's really interesting is that in 2018, there was a secret government report, was never released until the Freedom of Information Act in 2021. Then there was the FBI report that was kept secret as well. And they both concluded it was mass psychogenic illness, mass hysteria. And that 2018 report had, of the first 21 victims, they recorded their attacks on 8 occasions. And that 2018 classified report analyzed those recordings, and they concluded those strange sounds that were thought to be from a secret weapon, when they heard the sound and then felt unwell, turned out to be the mating call of the Indies short-tailed cricket. But the government didn't release that information. They kept that private. Yet publicly, you had a lot of senators who would have been aware of those reports who were saying things like, oh, we think it's a sonic weapon or a microwave weapon. And now the CIA has concluded that there was no microwave weapon. There was no foreign adversary. It was just crickets.
So what's strange in this situation about you getting bombarded with death threats is that the typical stereotype that people would have out there is that these extremist Muslim groups who don't want these women to go to school, they would be the ones trying to death threat you. But instead, this is really weird because I'm critical of religion and supernatural claims all the time. I suspect you and me have a lot in common, especially since you've written in Skeptic Magazine and such. But like, this is kind of weird. Why would they be so anti or even death threats toward you on this topic? You would think that would be the radicals, right? The radical jihad or particular Muslim groups. No, people are death threatening you from you saying, actually, I don't think the evidence points toward these extreme Muslim groups gassing the girls in school.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. I've thought about this. And I think what's going on is both sides are trying to demonize the other. And they want to make them look bad. And so, look, anybody gassing young schoolgirls, it's just bad PR. They need to get a better publicist, right? Right? And what's happened is you've got the Iranian government coming out. And so, look, I published an article in Psychology Today, my blog, and then got bombarded with these threats when I said it. I think it's mass psychogenic illness. And then Psychology Today folded because they were getting all these complaints as well. And so after that happened, though, the Iranian national media had taken the article and they put it on their main website. So people were seeing the article and then going to me, and they had my email address. And I was getting like 2, even 3 threats an hour there for a while. And so they wanted it taken down, which it was taken down. Then it was on Reddit. And then they got so many complaints on there. There was uncivil discourse that they took it down from Reddit as well. And so I think the reason they're doing this, you've got the opposition, and they want to paint the government as so evil and so deprived that they would stoop to no level, and they would even poison innocent schoolgirls. Then you've got the government coming out now and doing the same thing. They have said just a couple of days ago, we've started arresting people, and we believe that this is foreigners in the opposition, and this is so evil and so deprived. So you got this on both sides. Neither side wants to hear that it's mass psychogenic illness because they want to demonize the other side. But here's the interesting thing. This is what stuck out to me. You've got this going on since mid-November, so about 3.5 months. Up until 2 days ago, they had no suspect. They had made no arrests. No one had died. It was rapid onset and recovery, so everybody recovered quite quickly. It's a group of young Islamic schoolgirls under extraordinary stress in extraordinary times. And let me just read you a headline.
Sure.
Schoolgirls targeted in gas attacks. Suspected poisoning of 120 schoolgirls. More than 100 schoolgirls, teachers poisoned in suspected attack. That's not Iran in 2023. That's Afghanistan between 2012 and 2015. And I did a study in Afghanistan in Herat province. And between 2009 and 2018, there were over 60 cases of schoolgirl poisonings in Afghanistan. There have been 5 different studies on this, one by the World Health Organization, another by the United Nations, the one that I was involved with, one with the Afghan government. They all concluded the same thing: mass psychogenic illness. Nobody died over those years, all rapid onset and recovery. And the theory was it was some type of poison gas in most instances, in a few cases, poisoned water. It all never turned out to be true. And then I have another headline here: school children poisoned by gas. Islamic school children fall ill, apparently poisoned. That was 1983 in the disputed West Bank in the Middle East. And you had an outbreak there involving over 1,000 Palestinian schoolgirls who allegedly had been poisoned by the Mossad. And what was interesting there was you had 3 different studies. 2 were published in The Lancet, one of the best medical journals in the world. And then 1 was published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. All 3 concluded it was mass psychogenic illness. And when they did the research, it was triggered by an initial sensational case at a school with an odor from a toilet, and then exploded in the media after you had this in the media. And there was one media report in Israel in particular that helped to spread it, in which the reporter heard that some of the victims had blurred vision, and he reported, instead of blurred vision, that they'd gone blind, which caused this panic. And so Cairo, Egypt, 1993, you had 1,500 Islamic schoolgirls, stories that they had been attacked with poison gas. This theme keeps happening over and over again. And when it's investigated, you find that it didn't quite happen the way that they were reporting. And now, just about 36 hours ago, the Iranian health ministry has said they have sent experts to a number of these schools, and they have concluded that 90% were caused by anxiety. And in the other 10%, it must have been a mild irritant gas, nothing particularly serious. I think when the fog clears and the dust settles, you're going to have 100%, and they'll be concluding that this was all mass psychogenic illness.
Now, I know the question I'm going to ask is going to sound silly to you, but it's worth asking for the sake of our audience. Are you just here to defend the radical regime that is out there in these regions of the world?
I am an objective outside observer. I am not a fan of the Iranian government. However, I don't think they do themselves any favors when I have a friend who's a professor at King's College London who was interviewed by the BBC recently, in which he said, look, this looks like mass psychogenic illness. And he said, similar to what I just said about the early reports in the Middle East and in Afghanistan. And then he got bombarded with threats. And so you can't kill a message, though. And it's all about transparency and discussing this. Could this have happened? Could young schoolgirls have been poisoned in this case in Iran? Sure, anything's possible. But on the weight of evidence, the evidence at this point is overwhelming that what you've got. I mean, if this happened 2 days ago, but this happened 3.5 months ago, and after 3 full months, they still didn't have any suspects, didn't have any toxin. They'd done blood tests. Everything came back fine. And so on the weight of evidence, I think this is an outbreak of mass psychogenic illness.
It's interesting. Let's go into some of this evidence or the lack thereof pertaining to the gas. What are we looking at? What is the discovery? How many girls are involved? What have they tested? They tested all the water. They've tested the air. I mean, what have they done to know that we don't know what the answer is? We can't find any evidence that they've actually done anything to these girls, but they've already said who they think did it.
Here's the interesting thing. That happened in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, after they had the poisoning reports, after a while, the government came out and started arresting people on suspicion of having been involved in the poisoning. So this is something that was very predictable. It's the same thing that happened in Salem, Massachusetts to those young Puritan schoolgirls, right? And that's what you've got here. you've got a group of young girls in Iran and in Afghanistan and in Egypt and in other parts of the Middle East. And these young girls have no means of redress, right? Like they can't really complain to authorities because it's really not done in that society. So this builds up, and you got all this free floating anxiety out there. And so whenever you have a preponderance of females like this, young girls, that's the number one group for outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness. The number one trigger of mass psychogenic illness over the past century is an unusual odor. And so what I think has happened here is you've got this going on for about 3 months. And then there was a case that blew up in the media, got international attention. And then this spread all throughout Iran and throughout the world and on social media over there as well. And so the rumor then was that young schoolgirls are being targeted, most likely by the government, as retribution for the protests involving the hijab, the headscarf over there. And what's interesting there is, I think what's happened, now you've got all these girls who are hyper vigilant, who ordinarily you go to school and there's all kinds of odors out there. There's food stalls, there's normal odors that you get from industries, whatever. And now they're hyper vigilant about their environment. And they are prone to redefining these odors that have always been there as some type of an attack. They've got all this stress as well anyway, and then they can easily hyperventilate. One faints, and then that triggers the other girls. And look, this is the same recipe for outbreaks of chupacabras or the Loch Ness Monster, right? The Loch Ness Monster is notorious, the sightings, for going in waves. You won't have a sighting for years sometimes. Then all of a sudden, there'll be like 30 sightings within 2 weeks. And what happens is people ordinarily look at the lake. They don't pay too much attention. But then when you have these media reports, people start scrutinizing their environment. Same with UFOs. You look up in the sky, you see a light in the night, you don't think too much of it. But now it becomes an extraterrestrial spacecraft, or a rustling in the bushes now becomes Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. And so you've got people hypervigilant, not only for their environment, but they're hypervigilant about their body. And that is also a classic for mass psychogenic illness. You know, it's a really powerful thing. There was a case not long ago in the United States where this guy was on an experimental depression medication, and he was involved in this study, has a fight with his girlfriend, takes all of the capsules, then has second thoughts and is rushed to the hospital. He was on an IV drip for the next several hours. He had all kinds of symptoms, headache, nausea, dizziness, and those symptoms did not abate. And then 4 hours later, one of the people involved in the study came down to his hospital bed and he said, you know, we checked. You were in the placebo group. And over the next 15 minutes, he wrapped.
Hold on, we lost Dr. Bartholomew.
Very dramatic.
Dr.
Very
Bartholomew,
dramatic.
Go back a little bit to the placebo. You broke out for a second. You said he was in the placebo group. I laughed, and then all of a sudden you kind of disappeared for a second there.
Yeah. So as it turned out, the guy goes down to the hospital bed and he says, you were in the placebo group. So there was nothing wrong with him. And it's the power of an idea.
Yep.
And people, the other aspect here is just like Havana syndrome, people will say, well, Havana syndrome was mainly diplomats and these people aren't prone to hysteria. No, we are all potential victims because mass psychogenic illness is spread by an idea. We all have ideas. We all have beliefs. Therefore, we are all potential victims.
So let's play into this thing here. There's been a lot of protest, and rightfully so, females in the Middle East that have just been mistreated for so long, and they've recognized the lack of freedoms that they have. And so here they are, in a sense, standing up for themselves, but simultaneously becoming targets. So the anxiety for that is like already, look, we're targets. Am I on the right track here? Did you hear me?
No, you froze there for a second. Yeah, I can see you
Okay.
now.
So here are some females. They kind of lack the freedoms, obviously, we have in the West. They're standing up for themselves. So there's the anxiety of standing up for themselves, protesting and whatnot. And they have targets on their backs now in their own minds. And so they're thinking, okay, we're enemies to people in our own state. This is the breeding recipe, so to speak, like a brewing stew pot of anything that could go wrong does go wrong. And if it starts something, the rest of the people will start to believe it and even have symptoms from it as well. This is what you're suggesting.
That is exactly what's been going on in Iran. And the other thing is 120 schools. The health ministry said there have been 120 schools affected. I mean, that's unbelievable. They have 120 schools affected, thousands of schoolgirls at this point. And for 3 months, you never had a culprit. They always get away. They never found the gas. And then the supreme leader comes out about 36 hours ago, and he says, this is evil. We need to find these people. And suddenly they find a whole bunch of people and they arrest them. And they mentioned something about, they did say 90% were anxiety, but they did say, we found nitrogen gas. Well, nitrogen gas is like the most common element in the universe, right? I mean, it's very common out there. And it was just a vague statement, right? And when they say it wasn't any serious poison, it was an irritant, I'm very skeptical of something like that. So somebody's going around doing this at 120 schools and they always get away. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, the only thing that makes sense here is that it's psychological. It's mass psychogenic illness.
I just want to show a few of the reports here. One on BBC. So it's Iran investigates poisoning of hundreds of schoolgirls with toxic gas. And it says almost 700 girls have been poisoned by. I imagine the numbers have grown since then.
Oh yeah.
And then this one right here, I don't know how to pronounce this. Kamini.
I think it's Khomeini.
Khomeini. So Iran's Khomeini calls.
I could be wrong.
So he's already saying it's unforgivable after public anger. And then Dubai, March 6th, Iran's supreme leader said on Monday that the poisoning schoolgirls is an unforgivable crime that should be punished by death if deliberate, state TV reported. Amid public anger over a wave of suspected attacks in schools, over 1,000 girls have fallen ill after being poisoned. So pretty wild, like already, like who is this? So you have Amazon books. I want everybody to know. You also have a website, Robert E. Bartholomew. I hope people will check out both the books as well as your website. What are you thinking should be done at this point? Where are we going from here?
Well, I just want to preface with, I did a lot of research in Malaysia. There have been hundreds of outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness in Malaysia since the 1960s when they had the more strict Dakwah religious movement there. And I'd say there's about 300 cases I've collected, mostly media reports, in Malaysia. And it's almost all young Islamic schoolgirls. There, it's more twitching, shaking, altered states of consciousness because of the prolonged stress that they're under. And it's almost always at the strictest schools. And then if you go back into the Middle Ages,
we're having internet issues. Please forgive us for 1 second here. Be right back. This is interesting, everybody. This is really interesting. Let's see. I want to tie this into some other stuff. So just bear with us. Did we lose him? I think his internet's trying to catch up to us. Bear with us. Good to see everybody in the chat. What do y'all think about this so far? Let me know what you think down here in the chat. Okay, so Yeah, internet kicked him, which means he's going to come back in here in just a moment. I can't wait to see what he has to say. I definitely think this is an interesting thing. At the very least, right? If anyone's to blame, it's the pressure. It's really the difficulties that these female Muslims are having to endure in the society they're in. So really the fault, I guess you could blame it on the strictness of maybe some of the religious patriarchal expectations on these females. I don't really know all the ins and outs and intricacies, but I would imagine that extreme devout religious kind of expectation on females, especially imagine if they're on the internet and they see how well people in the West have it. Just imagine seeing the life that these girls in the West have compared to them, or even in Europe, even Muslim girls in Europe versus where they're at. That would make you feel some type of way. But then again, imagine they're not even seeing that, and they're just dealing with the stresses of whatever circumstances they're in over here due to such a horrific environment. I mean, it's just nuts. So I am waiting. Dr. Bartholomew is going to try and pop back in, I'm sure, at any moment. I want to see you in the chat, everybody. What do you think? Cheryl's in the house, devastating. This is the thing I'm predicting. I'm predicting people who hate Islam at all cost won't like what Dr. Bartholomew is saying. Whereas for me, I'm not a believer. I'm skeptical. Like I try to be as fair and balanced with evidence as possible. But I could see someone who's just absolutely against Islam in the West, for example, latching onto this and making a lot out of this. These are attacks, and that will be the narrative being spun rather than let's look at the data. What do the facts say? Because at the end of the day, if a terrorist group is really attacking these girls in school, I would want to say that's what's happening, right? So, okay, here he is. He's back.
Yeah. Well,
Dr. Bartholomew, I don't know what happened. Internet's playing games with us here, but I do want to say you were saying something about the strictness of the schools that they're in, and then we lost you. Like, don't even know what happened. Uh-oh. Lost him again. Let's see what happens here. Chat GPT says it's not like all women in the U.S. have it good. Look at the girls born into FLDS. That's true, which we just talked about that in the last few days with my buddy. Or the way lesbians are treated in conservative parts of the U.S. True.
yeah. I think we're good now. What happened was, I don't know. Somebody emailed me just before here and said they were going to try to stop the broadcast. I don't know how you even would do that, but yeah, it's crazy.
Weird.
Yeah, it is. And anyway, like I said, you can't kill an idea, and I don't think it helps anyone's cause for this. But what my fascination in this is the historical and
His internet keeps conking out on us here. You're back. You back?
Yep, I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you. I can see you. Yep.
Okay. Please. It's breaking out from time to time. So.
Yep. And look, this I've done last year. I did, I think, 71 interviews. Never had a problem. So I don't know. It's been
weird
odd here. But yeah, I think you were asking me about what should happen. I just think it's about transparency. It's about honesty, and it's about laying all the facts on the table, and let science and reason and the evidence follow the evidence. And unfortunately, in this case, you've got people that really hate each other on both sides, and they want to demonize the other side. And they just, mass psychogenic illness isn't in the playbook for these people. And that's unfortunate, but that is what it looks like. It looks like it's mass psychogenic illness, and too bad.
Oh, man. So again, we have, I want to tie this into something here, because there's always noises or scents that play a role in how people are reacting in this. And last time we talked, I briefly brought up early Christianity or faith type examples. And I know it almost sounds like, whoa, that is completely irrelevant, a completely different thing. But I have a buddy of mine, Paul is his name. He has a channel called Apologia. It's a skeptical channel. He once was a Christian. He's been hypothesizing on how Christianity started. And he thinks maybe Peter or someone thought they saw or experienced Jesus and then told the rest. Next thing you know, you have this mass, I'm going to use the term hysteria, where everybody's seeing Jesus in this early community, or everybody thinks they're experiencing him and they think that they saw the Lord or whatever. And so they're all like, he's risen. He did resurrect. Does this somehow tie into the contagiousness of people think they saw or believe they heard or whatever it might be, and now everybody's hearing or seeing or believing in these things?
Well, look, you have reports of things like people claiming to see Bigfoot, right? Which is eyewitness testimony. And we live in an age of journalism and the media, and they still get it wrong. Like, you go there and you investigate. It's like, oh, they got that story wrong. Or I'll do an interview with somebody. And it's like, oh, they got that wrong. There's usually one little thing that they get wrong in the story, right? And if somebody repeats that story, the next thing you know, you've got 10 things that are, and then it gets exaggerated. And the same thing with rumors, right? As rumors go on, rumors are like a bowling ball, right? Once you let it go, you can't control it. And it morphs and it changes. And, you know, there's something really interesting. When I was first doing research on the original 4 Gospels, right, that have been translated into English, there were reports of people, as I recall, seeing Jesus after the resurrection. And they said they couldn't, like his face was really bright and they couldn't really see his face. I mean, that is a indicator of some type of potential hallucinatory phenomenon. And I always thought about that. It's like, that's really interesting. You know, it's like it was shining and things like this. And but it's so easy. I mean, we see today with an event how easily it gets, people are misinformed and people go down rabbit holes all the time, and they clearly get certain things wrong with like QAnon and stuff like this. If that's happening now in the information age, I mean, what's going on with the word of mouth? And you've got all these people believing in superstitions at that time as well, right?
Right.
So, yeah, very easily I can see that as happening.
Especially if they're in the traumatic state that they'd be in. Suppose their guy dies a brutal death at the hands of Rome. Yeah, I could imagine that. The only people that would have pushback would say, well, how come that didn't happen with all these other figures who had followed these other guys and whatnot, but it happens to this one? And what would you say to that?
Well, look, it's a long time. We're talking about something that happened a long time ago.
Right.
And it's just so hard to know, because my understanding is the Gospels weren't written down right afterwards. It's not like there's somebody writing it right down there. So, you know, you're talking decades later. And we know today with events that happened, especially word of mouth, even a day later or a week later, it gets distorted. So why wouldn't something like that be going? Because it's human beings, and it's the human condition. And we are very fallible creatures. We are subject to seeing things that aren't there. The face on Mars, right? Right. Maria Rubio in Port Arthur, New Mexico, who was cooking on her skillet in 1977 and burned it and thought she saw the face of Jesus. I'm not sure where she got that face from, because I'm not sure there are any photos there. But and then for years after, people came to her home and she had it under glass until not that long ago. I think it was her granddaughter took it to school for show and tell and dropped it. And now I think they just have the photo there. But yeah, I mean, things are so easily distorted, and people see what they want to see. And these rumors, as they morph and change, reflect what people want to hear. So look, I've heard people have said to me, oh, there's been a number of deaths. A number of these schoolgirls have died from poisoning. They have brain damage and this and that.
I've heard that too.
Yeah. And there's no evidence for that. And when I was on Iranian television a couple of nights ago, that was brought up that you had this family came out and they're saying, oh, they claim my daughter was dead. No, she's not. She's alive and well. And so you've got rumor and counter rumor. And now you're going to get, with all the fog going on and all the emotion, you'll get, claim and counterclaim in the media, just like with Havana syndrome and other things. But you got to push out the noise and look at what the scientists are saying. And in Iran, the scientists are saying, the ones that have been to the schools, at this point, it looks like 90% were caused by anxiety. And that other 10% doesn't seem to, they're playing it down as being serious. Even though, and this is after the supreme leader came out and said we need to bring these people to justice. So to me, reading between the lines, maybe they had me on Iranian television to get the population maybe somewhat sympathetic to the mass psychogenic illness explanation in some cases. And again, 120 schools. On some days, there were 24 schools affected. So it would just be the most incredible operation to go into these schools all over the country and gas young schoolgirls. Just doesn't make any sense.
So did you do this remotely, for the Iranian TV?
Yeah, they interviewed me on Zoom.
And do you have any clue what they were trying to get? You think they were trying to get you to kind of give people kind of something to calm down about in terms of terrorist attacks?
I think the narrative now is it's mostly anxiety, but there could be some nefarious, and they're really suggesting this now because they've arrested people, right? Some nefarious agents out there, foreigners and the opposition, who are so deprived that they're doing this to our schoolgirls. And isn't that evil? And then the opposition's trying to do the same thing to them. And so the opposition in particular, I'm not getting it from the Iranian government. I'm getting the pushback from the opposition.
And who's the opposition?
Saying, the people who are against the government. Okay. These people are saying we're Iranian activists. We're against the government. They're evil. They're doing this. And you're a puppet. How much are they paying you? It's well, nothing. I'm just trying to get that information out there for civil discourse, and hasn't been very civil at this point.
Wow. How do we resolve something like this sooner? Because it seems everybody needs this to kind of push their political agenda in whatever their motivations are. They got to use the narrative. Then once they've used the narrative, okay, we can allow the facts to really speak and scratch our little emotional stuff. We've been hating these others. How do we speedline the facts? Do we start having more trust in the scientists? Do we just start to have a more skeptical epistemological approach to the world around us? I mean, don't let emotion speak as much as the facts and the data. What do you suggest to somebody who's seen this over and over and over?
Well, it keeps happening, and broadcasts like this early on, as early as possible, to try to make people aware of facts. But part of the problem here is the whole notion of mass psychogenic illness, right? Because people will say, we're not crazy. We don't have a mental disorder. And
my mom just said that earlier. Go ahead.
That's right. And look, that's not what mass psychogenic illness is. Mass psychogenic illness is based on a belief. We all have beliefs, therefore we're all potential victims. And think of it as a collective stress response, as opposed to, using the term hysteria. Now, some neurologists will use the term functional neurological disorder. That's basically a more individualized view of this. Mass psychogenic illness is the more collective view of this. But you also have social panics. And I think that's going on as well. A social panic in extreme, like a moral panic, right? You get a reaction to some nefarious group in society, which is seen as tearing down the fabric of society. And so you've got an overlap of mass psychogenic illness and social panic. And what's the social panic here? The social panic is the enemy at the gate, the evil other attacking society. What was it with Havana syndrome? It was the enemy at the gate, these evil foreigners who are attacking American diplomats and now around the world. Plus, with Havana syndrome, you had a technology panic, the fear of new technology, right? Because in the late 1800s, when the telephone came out, you had people getting telephone sickness from hearing the crackling sound on the phone line, and that was considered causing them to get sick. When AM radio first came out, people thought they were getting sick from the radio waves. Ice cubes, because it was created artificially. Wi-Fi, mobile phones, 5G. So technology panic with the enemy at the gate with Havana syndrome. But with what's going on in Iran right now, I think it's pretty much pure enemy at the gate, the evil opposition and the evil foreigners, right? And that historically has brought people together. I remember the Iranian Revolution in, when they had the hostage crisis back in the, December of 1979, and they were held for 444 days and all that in Iran. You had the society came together there against the evil Americans. And that is something out of the playbook that has worked over and over again in Iran and other countries, right? You find an enemy and you get society to see them as so evil that they actually, even though they don't necessarily like the government, it's like, well, we're going to go with you guys because the other side is satanic.
Wow. And a good point Melody Joy brought up was satanic panic, for example. You know what I mean?
And that was in the, that happened, was triggered by the book Michelle Remembers, a Canadian book by a psychiatrist, about 1981, 1982. Then you had the Manhattan Beach, California case, the biggest civil case in American history at the time. And you had over 300 children who were allegedly had been abused. And there was a satanic coven there, and they had all kinds of weird things going on. And after the trial, it turns out that they were all exonerated because it didn't happen. And these things easily blow up, right? And they blew up in daycare centers. It was part of the stranger danger scare at the time. And I think there's always a scare out there. And there's always an enemy to hate. Right now, it's Russia. In the past, it was communists. It's been homosexuals. There's always some group who are on the margins of society, who are threatening society, and they have to be dealt with. It's part of our condition, I think. It's part of who we are. And psychologists know that it does bring people together when these scares happen.
So two things come to mind, and that is how, again, do we resolve this sooner, better, faster to prevent these kind of things from happening? I mean, we have a divided nation right now in America that just, it's us versus them kind of mentality on both sides. How do we solve this based on your research without it getting out of hand?
I think a lot has happened, and there's been so many rabbit holes created. I mean, they're not rabbit holes, they're elephant holes. And they have been created by internet algorithms. And, the internet pushes extremism. And that's really unfortunate. And I think we have to crawl out of the rabbit hole and get a better control of Facebook and all these social media sites. Is it censorship? Not necessarily, but these algorithms that are pushing people in, and it might be good business for Facebook, but it's not for humanity. And I think we've never seen so much hate in the world. And this is helping to drive it. That's number one. Number two, and I'm not being patronizing, and I mean this, what you are doing is invaluable with MythVision because you are going directly to people. And look, in this case right now, you've got a group of people trying to They've succeeded in taking down my article from Psychology Today. They've succeeded from taking it off Reddit. But I'm on here now speaking about it. And I will somehow circulate that article as well, so people get the information, because you can't kill an idea anymore. And it's all about transparency, being honest, and just having frank discussions where nothing is off the table. But we have to do this. Unfortunately, we can't control these things happening. They just organically happen.
Right.
All the education in the world, we are Western countries, the most sophisticated legal systems, the most sophisticated education systems, technology systems, and we have Salem-like social panics going on in the 21st century. And so we can't stop it from happening, but to try to recognize it, and that's a great point. How do we recognize this as soon as possible? Well, once this blew up about 8-9 days ago of what was going on in Iran, and it spread around the world, now we're aware of it. And now we're trying to, ordinarily we counter it, but now they're trying to shut people down. And when media outlets like Psychology Today will take down an article, not based on the merits of the article, but based on, we're getting all these complaints now, we're going to take it down. That's not a good thing for society.
So I also think when you go into Facebook and stuff, all like looking at a lot of the news media too on TV, my mom and my dad, they are more on the conservative side of things. And I think Fox is their primary thing. And they like, I'll go over there. They live right down the road from me. And they act like there's kind of this war. And like the other is just out to destroy the Constitution, to destroy this nation and things like that. And so in a sense, there's kind of a hysteria developed from the media just on TV, let alone Facebook or other places that are kind of promoting these us versus them mentalities.
That's a really good point. And I've thought about that a lot when I do watch Fox to see what's going on there. And they did have me on for Havana Syndrome. I was on Tucker Carlson tonight. And they let me make my point. But what Fox has done is similar to what's going on in Iran right now. And that's demonizing the other side. How many times do you see the evil Democrats, right? And they made them out to be the evil other. And that's really unfortunate. And it doesn't have to be that way. They can get their message across. And I think you do get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And yes, it does appeal to a certain audience, but if you want to broaden your audience and you want more honest intellectual discourse, then it's not good to demonize others. I've heard people, my own kids have said, CNN, they hate Trump and they're always negative about Trump. And there was a study that came out at Harvard that said like roughly 90% of the mainstream media have negative stories about Trump. But I pointed out to my kids, I said, yes, but he's making outrageous claims and he's claiming things that aren't true, right? So you have to call that out in the media. I'm not a fan of Trump just because I think some of the stuff he's done is not really honest. And I just don't. I used to work for CNN radio affiliate in Albany, New York in the mid 1980s. And I mean, there was a policy there at the time, and I think there still is. If you have a story and you are aware that it is incorrect or incorrect things about it, you have an obligation to immediately, as soon as possible, correct that story. And CNN isn't perfect, and they got Havana Syndrome wrong. They kept saying that there were studies that showed that in Cuba, the patients had brain damage. They never had brain damage. They had brain anomalies. It's not the equivalent. It's not unusual for small cohorts to have anomalies like that. It's the same type of anomalies you get if you're under long-term prolonged stress. And if you took the schoolgirls in Iran right now and you MRI'd their brains, they'd probably have similar scans to what the minor anomalies were coming up with a Cuban cohort. right? And the same with the Puritan girls in Salem, Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1691 and in 1692. And also in Malaysia with those young Islamic schoolgirls as well. It's no coincidence it's young Islamic schoolgirls. They're the ones who are under the most stress. The question I get a lot is, well, is it genetic? Why is it always girls and not males? And all I can tell you is I've got 3,500 cases of mass psychogenic illness I've collected going back to the Middle Ages. 99% are majority female. Now, I would argue as a sociologist that certainly not necessarily innate female biology, but certainly a role is played by the social role here, where what girls are being affected. If this is if there's something going on in a Western school in California, well, the girls are going to have a go at their teacher, might even walk out of school.
Right.
So they blow off steam. In Iran and in some of these strict schools in Malaysia, that's not happening because you're not allowed to have redress with the authority figures, particularly religious authorities, and you just take it and it builds and it builds. And in Malaysia, you get the twitching, shaking, altered states of consciousness. You get a disruption of the nerves and neurons that are sending messages to the brain. And you get these outbreaks of demonic possession, which are psychological dissociation states. And a really interesting thing, and it's very rare, seems to be going on in Iran right now that I've noticed, and that is most cases in Western society of mass psychogenic illness are triggered by an unusual odor. That's what's going on in Iran, but you also have some reports of the twitching, convulsions, and that's the Malaysian style long-term prolonged stress. And you seem here to have a combination of both going on, which I've never seen that before, with the exception of, I know there's a report in a non-Western country right now. I'm not able to talk about it, but you got something similar because a journalist was asking me about it recently, where you've got claims of reports of gas, and also you have them going into like trance states and stuff like this. And so this is a really interesting twist because mass psychogenic illness morphs over time, right? In the Middle Ages, it was usually demonic possession. It manifested with prolonged stress. But you've got these schoolgirls in Iran who have been under so much stress for months now. And that free-floating anxiety is the same type of thing that happened with the tick-tock ticks, right? And those, I'm sure you're familiar with that case. During the lockdown, you had thousands of young girls around the world supposedly catching Tourette's from the internet, from watching these influencers. And you had millions of views on YouTube and TikTok of these influencers claiming to have Tourette's, and then these young girls getting Tourette's. It was called the TikTok ticks. And neurologists noticed a surge during the lockdown, 3 to 4 times of what you would normally find. And when they looked at these girls, they found that they didn't have Tourette's, that it was psychogenic. And the interesting thing about Tourette's is a hardware problem. These psychogenic tics are a software problem. Tourette's is 3.5 to 4 male over female. It almost always starts in young children. And what you had there with the TikTok ticks was thousands of young girls, sudden onset in adolescence. That's just unheard of. It's unprecedented. It's never happened in history. And that's why it was so conspicuous to the neurologist, right? So you get these waves of mass psychogenic illness, and that's what was going on with the TikTok ticks, because I did a documentary on it. And you just keep getting mass psychogenic illness emerging, but in different forms. You had, over the last year and a half, people eating Lucky Charms cereal and posting to this I am poisoned website online that it was making them sick. All of a sudden, you get 7,300 cases poisoned to the I am poisoned website. People claiming that Lucky Charms made them sick. The FDA investigates, and what do they conclude? There's nothing wrong with the cereal. Shortly after that happened, then people were posting that Cheerios was making them sick, and there's no evidence that that was going on. And then recently, I've been in touch with a company in New York City who had this product, Lentulin Leak. And somebody posted to the I Am Poisoned website that that was making them sick, and they had to pull the product. And yet there's no evidence that there was anything wrong with the product. So we live in this age of instant technology, right? The internet age, where these panics, scares, social hysterias can spread in the blink of an eye.
So we have a couple naysayers in the chat. Kat Suhata says there was poison found in their blood. It's not hysteria.
Well, look, up until a few days ago, the government was saying there wasn't any poison from any of the blood tests. And that is from the Iranian government. And now the Iranian government is saying 90%, the health ministry, is mass psychogenic illness. And it's quite interesting. You got over 3 months and they find nothing. Everything comes up negative. So, I'm not buying that.
Let me nail something down here. You're suggesting, all right, this is an interesting point. Based on the reports we have now, 90% of the total, let's just say 1,000 girls to be numerically, okay? 90% of them were having the same symptoms. And let's just pretend we don't know exactly what's going on with the 10%. Okay. Like, how would 90% of them get these symptoms if they didn't get poisoned and the poison doesn't show up in their system at all? How would that happen? I don't understand how that would occur without them being poisoned too. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Well, look, these symptoms that they're exhibiting, headache, nausea, dizziness, temporary loss of consciousness, right? These are bread and butter symptoms of mass psychogenic illness. And so the government has come out and said, oh, we've been checking, and this was like in the last 36 hours. There's no evidence of any serious poison here. We think there might have been a mild irritant. Well, that's very suspicious. And what are you talking about? What's the specific poison? I heard somebody say recently from the government saying it was nitrogen gas. Well, what about it? It was just vague. Just they threw that out there. But you've got, see, the problem is in situations like this, the supreme leader has now come out and said, we suspect something's going on. Then all of a sudden, and we need to make arrests. Then all of a sudden, within a short period of time, they start arresting people and accusing them of, and that's exactly what happened in Afghanistan. That's exactly what happened in the West Bank in 1983. And those were concluded to have been outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness. I mean,
so we're just following the same steps as these other ones that have come out. Like, actually, we weren't poisoned. We now know that this was a mass hysteria on the people. So jumping to conclusions now because media says one thing or says, oh, these girls are poisoned, you're just buying into the propaganda, according to what you're suggesting at this moment.
I mean, what you have to do is just look at the facts and try to clear away all the noise there, right? If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, the first thing that stood out to me was over 3 months, nothing. They hadn't found a suspect. They hadn't identified a gas, and they had done blood tests. And there were statements in the media that the blood tests had come back negative, okay? So you look at that. You look at a preponderance of young girls. You look at political turmoil under tremendous stress, extraordinary times that these people are living in. Rapid onset and recovery. That's also benign transient symptoms. That's a classic with mass psychogenic illness. And so you look at those facts in the case, and then all of a sudden, this blew up in the media. And once this blows up in the media about 8-9 days ago, then you get the government is like, ooh, this is evil. We've got to stop this. And then they start looking for scapegoats. And this is a classic historically in this, the search for scapegoats going back to the Middle Ages, right? Because if the government finds a scapegoat for some of this, then it paints the opposition as evil. And then the opposition is doing the same thing. But clearly, the health ministry now coming out and saying 90% are caused by anxiety. That's really interesting. So now they're only painting the other 10%. But they're watering that down as well because they're saying a mild irritant.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't some type of serious poisoning here. So it's very, very suspicious. Are schoolgirls being poisoned in Iran? Maybe they are. But the evidence isn't there, and it points to mass psychogenic illness, and the historical antecedents are there as well.
This is fun. I really appreciate you doing this too and coming on and sharing this information. I like I said, I have no problem either direction. Like for me, right? Either direction, whatever the facts are. I mean, I have a problem in the reality of if people are really getting arrested who didn't do this. Let's just say the government's arresting people who didn't do this. I have a problem with that, morally speaking. I have a problem if there are people actually poisoning these girls. I have a problem with that. But I also have a problem in any direction you go with, because even if it was just purely the stress and environment situation that these females are put in, and whatever the qualifies that, like someone in the chat was saying, the schools aren't that harsh on these girls. What would be the motivation for them to be overly stressed to cause them with that anxiety to go into this kind of mass hysteria? What was brewing in the pot before all this went down that you would say points to why the girls went into this kind of state?
Well, that's easy. What was brewing in the pot was the scarf protest, where you see pictures of young girls, right, removing their headscarves and giving the middle finger, right? You've seen pictures of that around the world. And then the rumors started that the government was going to target these girls, kind of like the rumor, very similar with the Taliban, that the Taliban was targeting the girls in Iran. So you just need one case to trigger this off. And now it's like these girls are now hypervigilant. They're going to try to poison us as well. That is a classic. And so, I mean, the extraordinary stress that these young girls are under and have been under for months now in Iran with all these protests going on, and with the whole thing with the hijab and stuff like that. I mean, there is not enough stress to go around for a lifetime that they have been under. And then it's the rumor that once you get the initial case, now the initial case could have been just a gas leak or something like that. You know, somebody cooking something and triggers a case. You get a case. Once you get that initial case, then it becomes spreading on social media or in the media in general. Then you've got people hypervigilant and on the lookout for poison gas. And then what's the saying? Speak of the devil and he shall appear, right?
Right.
If men define situations as real, they're real in their consequences, and it works for women as well.
It's really strange. You brought me a memory in my past that I don't remember till just now. I mean, like it was like nothing I thought about. My father is a retired Green Beret in the Special Forces. He was a 7th Group Master Sergeant, all sorts of, bells and whistles on his chest, the whole nine. And there was something going on when the war in the Middle East happened back after 9/11, where we had relocated back to the States from Puerto Rico, and my dad would go out and check our car, and he would make sure there was no tracking devices. He was making sure that nobody was he was overly OCD about everything about it being an attack on him, potential attack on his family to gain intel, because he had obviously a secret clearance to be able to know stuff from government stuff. Like he was so, every time he'd hand us weapons and say, if they get you, and I'm over here as a kid thinking the world, there are people who wear, they're covering their faces that want to kill me. And so I'm relating in some way, this is relevant to what you're saying here.
That's a classic social panic. Shakespeare, or In the Night, imagining some fear. How easy is a bush, supposed a bear. I taught at a middle school and Mill River Union High School and North Clarendon, Vermont, many years ago. And there was a teacher that had some disagreement with a student one day. And the next morning, she was in there in the side room, and I came in, and I said, "How are you?" And she was looking out the window. She said, "You know, that student just put his duffel bag there. I wonder if it's a bomb." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "You need to retire." I said, "It's time to get out. If you think that students are coming in and they're putting bombs next to your door or something like that." And but that's what happens in these outbreaks like this, these social panics. People look at the world differently. It alters your perceptual set of the world. And now you start noticing things you don't ordinarily notice. And it's classic in these cases over time. We are hyper vigilant. All of a sudden, suddenly, no one's seen Bigfoot for 6 years, and all of a sudden, there's 36 sightings in a week. But these girls in Iran, I think this is a key point here. They were put on alert, and then you get the rumor going, right, that poison gas. And there was a lot of smells out there, people cooking at food stalls. You've got industrial
using the
complexes.
restroom. I mean, simple as that.
That's right. And that's what triggered the outbreak in 1983 in the West Bank was an odor from a toilet. That was the initial trigger. And then the rumor started that they had been poisoned by Mossad agents. And then once you do that, now they're hyper vigilant. And I think that has happened in Iran. How in the world could you get 120 schools with poison gas attacks in Iran, and after 3 months, only just now you're finding a suspect and you're supposedly identifying some kind of agent there? It's really interesting what's going on.
So, Dr. Bartholomew, last thing I want to ask you for future reference. Does some of your work tie into religious stuff? I mean, like, obviously contemporaneous, I suspect some of this overlaps your religious stuff, but even in antiquity, do you ever make any guesses on some of that stuff? I'm asking because I'd love to do an episode where we're taking what you've learned as a sociologist and applying it to religious examples, whatever the religion may be. I imagine you have better evidence, of course, if it's contemporary. Like maybe you could study Mormonism and what's going on with Joseph Smith or.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can summarize that literature in one sentence. Believing is seeing. Because if you believe it, it alters your perceptual view of the world. If I live in a world where people believe there are leprechauns and fairies, and people used to, and they used to cite them in the thousands, right? Mm-hmm. Where did all the leprechauns and fairies go? And you walk around with that mindset, then you're prone to redefining a rustling in the bushes as a leprechaun, and you put your torchlight over there and you see two eyes shining back, and maybe it's a raccoon 6 feet up in the tree, or 3 feet up for a leprechaun, and you see a leprechaun because your mind fills it in, because human beings do not take in information like a video cassette recorder. Right. We interpret information, and we're very imperfect. I mean, look at some of these, the Egyptian apparitions of the Virgin Mary in the late 1960s and early 70s, which have been linked to tectonic plate strain and electromagnetic activities there in that Coptic church, right? And people were seeing the Virgin Mary. In Puerto Rico, you had the famous case in 1953 of the so-called miracle in Sabana Grande, Puerto Rico, where they had sociologists there in the audience. That's an episode in itself, where people see what they expected to see. And some people, what's the old saying there when you go to Lourdes or you go to Fatima? You see a lot of wheelchairs and you see a lot of crutches, but you don't see any wooden legs.
Wow.
Right. So people go there, they're crippled, they have health issues, and supposedly they're healed. Okay, they're healed, but you don't see many wooden legs there because, you don't suddenly grow a leg, right? Through some kind of miracle. It's more I think, psychosomatic, or you're misdiagnosed as well. Yeah.
I'm going to send you, I just did a video on my channel. I'm going to send you, if you have 20 minutes, it's 22 minutes long, and it's my little journey. But I think everything you said actually matches where I'm at today in terms of the critical thinking that you're discussing. I would love to do some more religious ones, since my channel specifically does that. I mean, and I do think that even the topic today has its roots in the religious background and the way that people are pressuring the hijab situation and whatnot. So I would definitely say, no matter how we look at this, I think there is a problem. And I think we should find a way to try and alleviate the stresses that are going on to the women that are out here protesting and trying to gain a little freedom, obviously. So especially, wasn't it someone who was killed, from what I understand, that took the scarf off or something?
That's correct. I think more than one. And look, I try not to take sides here. I'm just trying to, as an outside observer, it's just not helpful when you come out with a position and people are threatening to kill you, and that doesn't silence me at all. And if somebody were to, then the idea goes on anyway. I mean, it's not helpful for anybody's cause or anybody's side to do things like that. And it's all about information, assessing the information as we have. But it'll be very interesting to see what the health ministry says going forward here. And and look, in Afghanistan, we never found out what happened to those people who had been arrested. But we do know the United Nations and the World Health Organization both investigated and concluded it was mass psychogenic illness. There were 5 separate studies, 60 cases in total, and so similar to what is going on in Iran with the same groups, very similar symptoms, poison gas claims. It is so similar, you really have to have a serious consideration of this potential explanation.
Thank you. Let's do a follow-up on religious ones. Maybe we'll discuss that, and maybe we'll do a follow-up once more data comes out. We figure out what's really going on with more medical research that happens and such. So I definitely can't wait to do that and see what happens. Any final words from you?
Look, thank you for having me on. I wanted to get my message out there in a broad platform with a lot of well-educated, critical thinking listeners, and I think that is important. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, because it's something going on right now. People have an opinion on it, but people are suffering as well. And in Afghanistan, I wrote an article a few years ago with people who are involved in the Afghan government. I wanted those girls to know in Afghanistan that there was no evidence they'd been poisoned. Information is power. And I think that's important here as well, because people are suffering. And with mass psychogenic illness, the symptoms are real. And it's not just all in your head. And the same with Havana syndrome and these other conditions as well. These are real people who are suffering. And the best thing we can do is to have the best information we can and to get that information out there in a transparent way. So thank you for this platform.
Thank you, Dr. Bartholomew. I appreciate you. Look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.